What about you, Seth? First car, man.
So
Porsche?
Somewhat.
Maserati.
maybe a Hot Wheels.
But anyways, guys, let's kick it off. Let's not make this too formal. I'll let you, obviously, all three of you elaborate on who you are and you know what you guys do. But let me just take a second to say thanks for joining me on this ridiculous endeavor of trying to accomplish a 4-person podcast for my 100th episode. And thank you to the audience that's tuned in so far. But why don't we go around the horn, introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, and then I'll go back around and say, hey, kind of why I asked you specifically to be on the podcast. So Dennis, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, so Dennis Fowler, the Employee Benefit Practice Leader for BRP out of Dallas, Texas.
So BRP is Baldwin Risk
Baldwin
Partners,
Risk
right?
Partners,
Yeah,
yep.
very cool.
There you go.
So what about you, sir? I think people might recognize you from the media stuff, but let's go ahead.
Seth Denson. I am the head of Employee Benefits, Life and Health for Acrisure.
Cool, right on.
Chris Hamilton with Hotchkiss Insurance, and I lead our employee benefits consulting practice
Very cool.
and a partner.
Been a partner as well. Very cool. Well, so why don't I just name why you guys are on here, what maybe specifically I felt compelled to grab you. So I'll start with you, Dennis. So those of you that haven't seen episode 1, I think a lot of people that have followed this podcast have seen your episode just by nature of it being episode 1. But Dennis was my first person to ever take a leap of faith to say, yeah, I'll be your guest on a podcast. And I like to tell the story, Dennis, because you actually shot episode 1 twice.
Yes.
Yeah. And Nathan gets a kick out of it too, but we recorded audio for the first time on the first one in that old studio, but the cord wasn't plugged in.
Oops.
So we got great video, audio not so much. And so I had to call Dennis afterwards and be like, hey man, I'm really sorry, but you're going to have to drive back from Forney again, and we're going to have to do it again. And you were not only gracious, but you said even, hey, I would like to do it a second time.
Well, I think maybe the second time. I know, my second golf shot is usually better than my first anyway. So maybe,
Yes,
you know.
everybody wants a mulligan.
Yeah, so you got a mulligan. Thank you, and thank you for being appreciative of the fact that it was stressful for me to have that happen, and then you were very, very kind. So Seth, I had you on, man. You and I have been friends for what, probably 7, 8,
Many years.
maybe more years now. You were personally a mentor of mine from the business of benefits, but as well as what you've been able to accomplish in media. Been on the episode or the podcast twice now, I believe, and this is your third appearance.
Third time's a charm.
Third time's a charm, yeah. But you got to really do a good job this time.
I know, right? Well, the bar is high.
The bar is high,
Yeah.
yeah. And then last but not least, Chris, and I don't want to belabor this too much, but I think it's important to understand the why behind this. And Chris, you and I have developed a rapport probably the last couple years. We might have actually known each other the shortest amount of time. This is now your 4th appearance. We found a reason to talk about heavy metal, benefits, fitness, and I would consider you maybe my benefits muse. If I ever have a question about something technical, I go, hey, Chris, what do you think about this? So I really appreciate you for that.
That's a
Yeah.
high compliment.
I'm going to change your number in my iPhone. Actually, I shouldn't.
No, yeah.
My wife would be like, wait a minute.
Wait, what do you mean by that? Yeah.
Who's calling you?
Yeah, my muse. It's my muse, Chris Hamilton. Well, guys, I don't really have a formal agenda for today. So what I would like to really do to kick this things off and get some momentum is just talk about big picture state of the union stuff. Like, where are we in the benefits industry? What are the big things that are changing? What are the things that you kind of see happening and want to talk about in general? But why don't we just start with, what are you seeing broadly? Let's not talk about group size or self-funding or fully insured, but what are the things that you're talking about with your clients right now? Whoever wants to kick it off, feel free.
Muse?
Sure, go for it.
Mr. Muse, why don't we start with you?
So I think we see the convergence of 3 trends. So on a high level, from the carrier side or the payer side, what we're seeing is a shift in their business. So traditionally, they've just offered insurance to employers, but now what we're seeing is this continued vertical integration where they're now, obviously they own their own PBMs, they own their own specialty distribution, and now what you're seeing, particularly 3 of the carriers are vertically integrating into the provider space and even somewhat into the facility space. And so their business model is shifting. The compliance complexity is changing tremendously since COVID. Whether you're talking about gag clauses or the CAA or FFCRA, there's a number of things that are happening from a compliance standpoint. And then the third thing I would say is with employers, because of the rising costs, because of lack of transparency, and you're seeing a demand from employers that want to understand what am I spending, where is it going, and where are opportunities to become more efficient, because this is a large cost to our organization and it's growing every year. So I think those are the three broad trends that we see in our consulting practice that our clients are asking us how to address.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you about the vertical integration piece, because I know you posted about that recently. Describe to me what you mean, especially on the payer/provider side, because that is a phenomenon I'm seeing happen more often. I do think that's rife with possible conflicts of interest and things like that. So explain what's going on there, and maybe we can dig into why that may or may not be such a good thing.
So I think really, if you take United Healthcare, for example, they're the nation's largest employer of physicians. And they've got 70 to 75,000 physicians on staff. They've got the second largest PBM. They own their own specialty distribution for medications. They even have own facilities and surgical centers and dialysis clinics. They're also expanding into primary care, and there's a number of other verticals that they're going into. And really what you're seeing, not just them, but the big carriers that we're used to seeing, the BUCA carriers, they're amassing armies, if you will, is what I would consider it. And really their end goal is to amass scale and to steer through their systems, if you will. And when we look at the data, it's not always the most cost-effective way for an employer to spend their dollars. And so in my opinion, I think it removes a little bit of independence and a lack of control for employers as to where their dollars are being spent. Yeah. And so our whole goal is to figure out where are those misaligned incentives or perhaps even conflicts of interest, and how to design a plan that delivers the same or better, but at a more cost-effective arrangement.
Why don't you weigh in on that, Seth, if you don't mind? I'd like to hear your opinion a bit.
Well, it's hard to say anything different. I'm seeing that. I mean, you're seeing the same thing in Aetna, obviously, with what they're doing with CVS and the expansion of Minute Clinics and even their physical locations and expanding into primary care. And I think that we'll continue to see that. Going back to the original question, though, I think one of the things that we're seeing a lot in the consulting practice is a recognition of where the economy is likely going to go over the next few months. And employers that we're talking to a lot are really concerned about that, right? We're coming out of this COVID era, and for the most part, healthcare trend remained fairly stable, and I think there's a recognition. Later on, we can talk about what I'm hearing in the hospital systems and what I'm getting from them as well. But I think that for an employer perspective, they're looking at, okay, we've come out of this COVID era. We're dealing with remote work. We're dealing with lack of productivity. U.S. productivity is down. We're dealing with difficulty in the labor market of getting the right people. And we're hearing all of this chatter around recession, hyperinflation, and now this infusion of technology. And what does that mean? And so I think that what a lot of employers are looking to us to guide them through is this new era of what the employee life cycle might look like. Okay. How can we be more efficient and effective with fewer? Invest heavier in the ones that we have, layer that in with technology, and reduce the work count. And I think that over the next 18 months, this isn't an official prediction, but I do think that we see a massive shift in the employer market over the next 18 months. And that will be driven by the employers who have just candidly had enough. Okay. And they're sitting there saying, I can't do this anymore. The rising cost of healthcare coupled with difficulty getting people, I feel like I'm training somebody else's employee. I'm hearing all of this movement around technology, chat, GPT, all these things perhaps can help make me more efficient and effective. And I want to start leaning into that. I think that the market will cause employers to lean into that, and I think that they're going to look to us to help guide them through that.
Very cool. Yeah, I appreciate it. Why don't you comment on that, Dennis, and I'd love to hear from you the first question as well.
Yeah, so I think broken record at this point.
I didn't get you guys all to agree on everything. That's not why I brought you here. But
no, I mean, it's turning into a game of Monopoly.
Okay.
Right? And the board is about to be entirely controlled. They're about to have every single angle, right? They're going to have the railroads. They're going to have all the different colors. They're going to own it all. And when they do, costs are going to go up because they can control the whole thing. Mm-hmm. So to what Seth just said, I think it's about a matter of how do we as advisors and brokers guide them through that system, right? And when we live in a world of everything needs to be served to me in 140 characters or less, it is a nice idea as an end user, right? The employees, right? To think everything is one nice, neat place for me to go access it.
Okay.
So how do we as advisors unbundle what is being bundled, bring it back together so at the end of the day that the employee is going to have that same experience that bundled approach was about to give it, but without those cost inflation that's going to be surrounding it if we just turn over the keys.
Well, yeah, I've called that kind of the fragmentation in the past, because I do think what you're talking about, unbundling all this stuff, right? And now you see every component of a plan But a lot of consultants want to hodgepodge together all these cool things that they think are going to work great, but there's really no continuity, there's no congruence between those things. So the challenge is knowing what to select, but also knowing what vendor partners and relationships work well together. So can I go back to you on that question? What is the way that we accomplish that, where now you make that unbundling but rebundling as seamless as buying something fully insured off the shelf? How do we make that work? Is that through technology or what?
I think it's both through technology and having the right experts.
Okay.
Okay. So technology, AI, right? We're going through and analyzing. We just talk about a data warehouse as an example, right? Data warehouse 5 years ago was almost the repurposing of a Carrier database.
Okay.
Today, you're getting direct downloads of access from what comes out of the hospital.
Okay.
So what are we doing as brokers to utilize the data that we're getting in raw format to do a better job than just repurposing what was already given to us?
Okay.
So that's through the technology, right? And that's just one example how technology can play. We're talking about using doctors through direct primary virtual care, right? Lowering the cost of that unit being consumed, increasing utilization on lower end things, catching higher claims before they become higher claims. Finding ways to use technology for where today's employee workforce wants to use it to bring it in to lower the cost of the unit consumed, increase utilization.
Okay.
So there's different ways to bundle that technology, but it's up to us as brokers, right? And you said, how do we do that? And that's where all the different experts within our teams and our firms come in place to make sure that we're going to choose those right vendors, right? So for us, it's a matter of like, if you're going to have an example, right, just through the direct primary virtual care, right? It's not a matter of going out and finding the lowest cost provider, right? What are their results? What are these doctors bringing to the table? We were talking about our own personal stories earlier. I've had 6 elbow surgeries.
Yeah.
The last doctor is one that actually fixed my elbow. What if I went when it hit them the first time and avoided 5 other surgeries?
Right.
Right. So you can use my own self as a personal example in that. So it's about making sure that we're using the right experts to analyze the right data to make those right choices to then bring it back together and offer that to the end user.
I want to hear you guys weigh in on that as well. Like, how are we making the member experience as dynamic as possible, but as simple as possible for people that don't interface with the healthcare system all that often?
I think it goes back to a few different things. So Dennis did a great job. I love analogies, and he described a game of Monopoly and how do you navigate that system. Being able to help an employee. Really, what we're doing at the end of the day is we're deconstructing the model, reconstructing the health ecosystem, being able to give access to people with technology. So whether it's an app, our firm is a big believer in being able to provide in-person or personal touch via a healthcare concierge to be able to navigate employees, because the healthcare system is really complex. And even in a world where we're now requiring transparency of data, it's not in a meaningful, really easy to use format for employees that are working on an oil rig or driving a truck or working in a warehouse. And so being able to provide and meet those employees where they are at that time of need is really important. And we found the most success by using a live human to be able to interface with those people to direct them where they need to go. And so when you start talking about kind of recreating that ecosystem, I think of 2 different things. Employers that are going to win are ones that are able to create this new ecosystem that drives down costs and on an acute basis. So real simple examples, somebody needs an MRI. Do we let them go to the hospital to get the $2,000 MRI, or do we steer them to get a $400 MRI and save the plan money? And when an employee needs a surgery because that MRI shows they've got a torn ligament in their elbow, do we send them to have the $60,000 surgery at the hospital, or do we have a direct contract that will do it at a fraction of that price? That's on an acute basis. The next iteration of that, well, let me back up real quick. Employers that have that ecosystem can win on an acute basis, but being able to look at the bigger picture, and the next iteration of that is going to be looking at it on a population basis. So where you're able to take the data directly from the hospitals, you're able to integrate EMR, you're able to integrate payers' claims and overlay all of that to understand what are my complex employees. And so when you look at the population of a particular employer, just say it's 100 or 500 employees inside of that group health plan, there may only be 5 to 10 employees that are really complex. They've got multiple comorbidities. We'll take somebody that's got obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and kidney failure. That's a really complex patient that's going to drive a very significant amount of spend. Today, not very many people are doing a good job of engaging that particular employee. And even if they are, it's on an acute basis and there's not much quarterbacking going on with that employee's health. But taking all of these data sources, overlaying them, and having clinicians that can look at that particular patient or the most problematic patients inside of a group, and being able to meet with those folks and determine who are your providers, what is their quality, let's get you to the right people, who's the quarterback. When you need care, something as simple as a gallbladder surgery for that patient can be very complex. You and I might go in and have a surgery like that and we're in and out of the hospital the same day. One of those patients might be hospitalized for several weeks because of that.
Okay.
And so being able to engage that patient, understand their care paths, making sure they're with the right providers, and making sure somebody is in charge of that patient, no matter what the situation is where you're going to get meaningful change in cost.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that is I think that there is a recognition that there's a generational shift going on as our baby boomer generation is starting to retire. And those are the ones that certainly were accustomed to this very personal human interaction, and it's essential. This generation coming up doesn't. And I think, Dennis, you hit on we live in 142 characters, or however much Twitter's up to. Maybe it's 200 now.
Yeah, I don't even know.
Anyway, but they do. We want information. We want to move quickly. We want to do it all on our app. So I think that employers that will win, to your point, are going to have to recognize that they're going to have to be multilingual from a perspective of not as we thought of multilingual, rather, hey, I've got this generation that's going to want to access the system this way. I've got this that's going to want it this way, and I'm going to have to do that. And then going back to the data piece, and again, it's hard to say anything over and above what Chris said. He just gave us a lesson on what needs to be done from a healthcare perspective, and I agree 100%. I think that right now our industry is stuck in being informed idiots, meaning that we have the information, we just don't know what to do with it. And we don't know what to do with it because we're turning to the old places to get the directional shift. And our industry has been stuck for the last decade in this shiny object syndrome mania where, oh, this is the greatest new cost containment. If I never hear the word cost containment again, it'll be too soon, right? Because it's like consumer-driven healthcare. It sounds great. Nobody's a good consumer, and nobody's containing cost. Because as soon as you do, the system is bigger and better and faster to figure out how to offset that. What we have to do is restructure the way that we're looking at the system and say, okay, there's really going to be two paths here. This is the way that the system operates now, but this is another way that it can operate. And for us as advisors, we have to bring more to the table to recognize that we need to allow our clients not to be informed idiots, but rather to engage with the person. There's an old adage, right? Don't miss the forest for the trees. Don't miss the tree for the forest, right? Recognize that it's very few things that are costing the vast amount of money. If we can focus in on those things, now we can set the standard for how we approach the entirety of the group and do that effectively. And one of the things we're investing heavily in, and I think both your organizations are too, is that clinical capability, is that ability to take that same information, dissect it. There is still the one most trusted facet of the healthcare system is anybody wearing a white lab coat. Now, we could have all shown up wearing white lab coats today, but that would have been a farce. The reality is we need to have those people at our disposal, whether they're part of our teams or accessible to our teams, that can articulate effectively to that end user, here's what you need to do. Some, though, will need to do it virtually through an app and in person. You've got to be multifaceted in how you
Well, and I like Chris said a little bit earlier, and I want to layer in on that. You talked about the human being still has to be involved. I think that's really important as we're talking about things like ChatGPT prior to this discussion. I might use ChatGPT to give me a baseline of information or the context of a post or something like that. You still have to layer the human element on top of that for it to actually resonate and connect with people. You were talking about the fact that both of you guys actually were touching on it's the individual, even the surgeon that you finally got to on the sixth time. The human being is the thing that differentiates it from actually working and not working, in my opinion. So we use these tools to empower us as human beings to make us better, but we still have to have the relationship with human beings at the end of the day to make those decisions.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with you on that. And we've tried to use technology, and we still use technology, be it an app that employees can access to get information. We design the benefits in a way that are easy to access all of these additional things to help lower the cost. I won't use cost containment.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Lower the cost.
I set the standard now. It's like,
Don't say cost containment.
So we want to lower the cost of the employee, lower the cost of the employer. Everybody wins in that situation. But what we have found is time and time again, and maybe it's the employers and employees that we work with, we find overwhelmingly above average, I think, employees in that time of need, they hear about their benefits at open enrollment, they get the booklets, Maybe they get some flyers and whatnot throughout the year, but they do not remember exactly how the plan works at the time they need it.
Yeah.
And therefore, having somebody, as you mentioned, in a white lab coat, that's where we've had the best traction, is having somebody that's been able to develop a relationship with those employees and say, Spencer, I understand where you are. We've already done the homework for you. You have a choice of these places that you can go to, the highest quality, lowest cost. It's no cost to you if you access them, but you can go wherever you want. And we give people simply a choice, but it's that engagement that happens real time when they need the service. And it needs to be outbound because employees typically don't remember to call in.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You just nailed it. Outbound, right? It's being proactive in doing that. Because when you're an employee, when you're that end user, when you're vertical, you're shopping. When you're horizontal, you become a patient and you just say, yes, fix me.
Yes, yeah,
right?
absolutely. That's
so you're no longer looking, right? You're not shopping to what you just said. You're not. So you have to have that outbound approach to make sure that you get that notification technology, right? Comes in, oh, okay. Dennis is about to go fill a script that's going to cost $11,000. What if I can circumvent the PBM entirely, buy it for $100, give it to him for free?
Yeah.
Everybody wins.
Yeah.
But you have to be proactive and outbound in that touch to get it done.
I do think, though, that we are at this amazing opportunity generationally of a shift that we haven't seen before. Because this generation that's coming up they grew up in a world of Amazon. They grew up in a world of e-commerce. They grew up not needing the brick and mortar as much and thinking that things should be virtual. So I do think that as time goes on, we can start to see more of a shift. The key to that, though, will be that we don't train the old way into the new generation.
Yes.
That we start to educate at a level that this new generation says, hey, the way that you are a consumer now is actually a pretty good way of doing it. We've got to make sure we have the tools effectively there to do it so that when they're horizontal, they've already had that mind shift to say, okay, no, this is the way.
Yeah, and actually, go ahead, Chris.
Well,
Do you want to talk about that?
No, I think these are all great points. Both of y'all have made excellent points. We also have the care, but we also have the incentive. So we have to have the design, but the incentive to the employee to allow them to make that choice that's meaningful to them.
Well, I think, honestly, at the end of the day, if you don't have the right incentives, people are still not going to use those tools. They're not going to use the things that are at their disposal because why? It's a little complex. I forgot what I'm supposed to do, but I don't have to pay my copay if I do this. What was that number again? And they'll go find it, right? They'll solve their own problem when they're properly incentivized. But let me ask you, though, do you think they have to have the reward combined with a little bit of the possible punishment if they don't as well? Do you think it's more effective when you have both sides of that behavior? Yeah, anybody can answer that. I see a bunch of smiles. So somebody.
No. So the smiles are because I think all of us track data. We've all talked about it, right? Data is important. Having a carrot and a stick works better than having a carrot. Yeah. Nobody wants to have a carrot and a stick. So you have to have that conversation with the employer of what is more important to you, right? Like, here's the potential result this way, here's the potential result this way. Here's how your employee population is going to see the stick, right? So do you want to go gung-ho and make sure that you're saving 17% instead of 11? Or do you want to have this avenue over here where you're going to save some and keep everybody happy, right? So it's not the same for everyone, but it's knowing what to do in the right situation.
And I think that, again, kind of going back to where we are from an economics perspective, I think we may see a shift in that.
Okay.
Right. So, I think we've all been in the industry a long time. And you came from banking. Dennis, you've been in about as long as I have in this side of the table. And I have watched the economic ebbs and flows that change the employer mentality. An employer that 6 months ago would be all carrots is now all sticks, right? And vice versa. And I think that the ability to have both is essential, but the recognition that that's going to ebb and flow with the economic times. The key, though, going back to if you want long-term stability, is you don't need carrots or sticks if you train appropriately how it should work.
Okay.
Right. So if you establish a foundational educational system early on, young people, literacy effectively that we talk about a lot, healthcare literacy and understanding it generationally, and it's something I've obviously been passionate about. Spencer, we talked about this, and some of the other stuff that I do is. That is where we start to see generational shift in the education outside of even the employer. That doesn't mean we don't need to do it in the employer, but it needs to be a broader conversation because if you do this right, the economic ebbs and flows won't matter because the process has been established effectively.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a weird position that the employer sits in, right? They're responsible for running their businesses, but they're responsible also for, they have almost, most of them take this paternalistic approach to healthcare, right? And they want to provide for their employees. They want to nurture them, want to give them these benefits. But it's a weird position to be in, because at the end of the day, they have to run these businesses and they have to be profitable so those people get paychecks. Right. So it's an odd position for them to have assumed over time to be also the ones that are providing good healthcare and good health benefits. So let me ask you now, since you talked on economics a couple of times, in this perceived, if it is actual downturn in the economy or an actual recession, what's changing about the conversations, right? Are we removing benefits? Are we not stuck on the shiny objects anymore and we're looking at the basics again? What are you guys talking about today with employers? ParetoHealth is the manager of the largest employee benefits group captive in the United States. And it's also now the main sponsor of the Self-Funded with Spencer podcast. I chose to partner with ParetoHealth for three main reasons. Number one, their dedication to improving the world of health benefits. Number two, their mission to reduce volatility and to make self-funding simple for mid-sized employers. And number three, the strength and scale of their program. With over 2,300 member groups and more than $1 billion of stop-loss premium under management, ParetoHealth is the most robust solution of its kind in the country, period. Stay tuned for more information, because I'm sure I'll be featuring them on an episode of the podcast very soon. Visit ParetoHealth at ParetoHealth.com or follow them on LinkedIn to stay up to date on the latest news and developments.
It starts with better questions. You do have to have better questions. You got to recognize you're going to get different answers based on those questions. So I think that the worst thing that we as advisors can do is go in and start talking the normal questions about how's your service and what's your deductible and what's your co-insurance. You really, if I can make one statement of this whole thing that you don't listen to anything else I say this: advisors today must increase their business acumen. It is essential to success, because the market is shifting and your ability to understand what that employer has to decide, the things you were just talking about. Yeah. Do I make P&L? What is my overall EBITDA? Where's my margin sitting? Do I have shareholders? And what is my return on that? How am I going to manage the credit lines and what the economy might do? And what's the Fed doing next week? All these things. You've got to ask questions around that. And then from that, ascertain what the strategy needs to be, both short and long term. Okay. Recognizing that the long term is written a little bit more in pencil, that can be erased and redone based on the economic factors. But if you want to elevate your game, you've got to ask better questions to understand truly what's going on from a business perspective, and then layer in what we do over and above that.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, I'm not to turn this into a sales podcast because we've already done that. But my first meeting, typically, I'm not really asking questions around specifics of the benefit plan. It's more about business strategy questions. What are the long-term goals of the company? What are you doing over the next 3 to 5 years? What do you see as your obstacles? Why is that important to you? What does it mean if you achieve that? What are the logistics that are needed? Getting an understanding of, from a business standpoint, where their pain points are and where they're trying to go. Because benefits can either be a support or a hindrance. And for a lot of the clients that we deal with, particularly in that 50 to 1,000 space, they're competing for talent. Don't need to say this to anybody, but it's uber competitive for quality talent. And typically they're competing against large national competitors that have a bigger budget, offer better benefits, and they need to figure out, how do we do this in a more sustainable and competitive way? Yeah. And you need to kind of lead them to that point for them to understand. And I'll back up just a quick second, because we talking about carrots and sticks, and I'm not going to disagree with Seth. I think education is uber important to just the population in general, when you talk about financial literacy, but also healthcare literacy. And we've spent a lot of time trying to educate employees, and perhaps there's better ways to do it than I have done it. I have found, I think people are busy, and they're raising kids, and they're trying to figure out how to make their mortgage payment and buy groceries and get to soccer practice and those sorts of things. And sometimes I think the healthcare discussion goes a little over their heads. And so employers today are figuring out, and they're asking, we're having these conversations, is there a way to design the plan to where it automates? It's automatic, where employees are going to get the carrot or they're going to get the stick. And I'll give you an extreme example of that. One of our larger clients has designed a plan that, when you start talking about carrots, do the right things, go to the right places, your healthcare end to end is free. Whether you need direct primary care, you need an inpatient open heart surgery, or anything in between, if you go to the right places, they're going to completely waive your costs. There's zero deductible to access everything. And it's because they use direct contracts and direct primary care and those sorts of things. But if you don't want to go through that, if you just don't remember how the plan works, you don't want to take the clinician's phone call when they call to try to steer you where you need to go, your deductibles are going to be very high. They've gone to the opposite end of the spectrum. Is it's free or it's really expensive.
Painful. Yeah,
It's
yeah,
really
yeah.
expensive. And so employees have a and the reason that they've opted for that is because they understand how to control the cost. And if employees are willing to be part of the solution, they're willing to give away all of their health care. If you don't want to be part of the solution and you want to do something else, that's fine. But it's a very easy choice. Really high cost for you or free.
None.
And that's the foundational component that leads to consumerism, right? Because you're putting the power back, but you're simultaneously putting information in their hands so they can be good consumers.
That's
I think
right.
That's the
I
critical.
want to give you the opportunity. Do you want to weigh in kind of on this line of questioning before we move on?
I agree.
You agree? Yeah. Boom. Agreed.
Yeah.
No,
they both said it.
No. You guys obviously. I think I presumed when I got you three in a room, not that there'd be a lot of agreement, but that there would be a relative similarity in philosophy, right? Because I think you guys have arrived at. I don't want to say you wouldn't say you're doing it the right way, but my outside perspective is you all are doing it the right way, but also in your own particular ways as well. But I want to talk about big picture, the role of morphing from broker to consultant / advisor, if those terms are interchangeable. I do think it's a really important, the language that we use emphasizes what you do or the role that you play in the economy. So I want to hear from you how you've seen that change over time from the inside, and then maybe what you think your role actually is going to be longer term in our economy as well. So I'll start with you, Dennis, since you were very brief on that last answer. Talk to me about the change of language, right, and why you think that might be important for your job.
So I'll say the three that are really out there, right? You have agent, broker, consultant, right? And I think agent makes us all kind of like, ooh, no, I'm not an agent.
Yeah.
Right? Because you just think about the transaction, right? And that makes you a transactional person, which means you are selling insurance.
Yes.
These carriers already have somebody selling it to us or trying to, right? So we don't want to be associated typically with the term agent, right? Or you think about like, and I don't mean this as an insult, right? Because I've done this one time where I told somebody, don't worry, I'm not going to sell you insurance for your car. That's not what I do. When I met somebody at a party at a house and they're like, so what do you do? And he's like, well, I work for insert carrier. He's like, I sell home and auto insurance. And I was like, oh, I'll be in your game room watching. But I think so, like the idea that being an agent, I would say 8-10 years ago, everybody wanted to step out of that. And then it was, no, we're brokers. We're brokers, right? We're here to understand what you're doing and to make sure we go get the right things put in place. And now it's really, I would say, if you're doing it well, you are a consultant. Because your first two questions are not insurance related. It's what are you trying to achieve? How can I help?
Yeah.
That's what I always tell our younger advisors.
Well,
if you start there, sorry.
No, keep going. Yeah.
So if you start there with those two questions, you could go infinitely anywhere, right? So now you really are consulting. You don't have an idea. Like I tell people and they're like, well, what do you think we should talk about? I was like, I have no idea. Don't worry about that, right? Because if you're going in there to help them, you could go any direction.
Yeah.
Right. And that really is consulting because you don't have an agenda about, hey, you really need to try my product. Right? No. It's what are you doing? What's not working? Where do you want to be? Let's talk about how we can help you get there. And you know what? Maybe I'm not the right person.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Because you build that equity up, right? And you start meeting with people. Like 7 years down the road, I've had somebody, come back and be like, hey, remember when we talked 7 years ago? I was like, yeah. He's like, I need to hire you now.
Yeah.
And
interesting.
It's about doing the right thing all the time, no matter the situation. So you don't have to have an agenda when you show up. So I think we're moving into consultants, to answer your question. And if you're doing it well, you're a consultant.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask you where that line of demarcation is, but you kind of answered it for me. But what do you guys think about that? Like how important it is? Because I realize some people shy away from titles, right? I don't really care about my title, but to represent what you do to the world and represent the role that you play, I think titles do actually have an importance. So what do you guys think about this notion of advisor, consultant, broker?
Well,
I got a bromance. There's a bromance going on over here a little
He's
bit.
my muse.
Yeah, he's my muse. He's everybody's muse. This is Benefits Muse. Yeah.
So I came from outside the industry, and I think the time that I got into the business, agent had kind of had its day, and people were brokers at that point. And so the three terms that I've heard used are broker, consultant, advisor. And I think the easiest way I define a broker is somebody that, and there's nothing wrong, everybody has a place at the table to provide service to clients. But I think traditionally as brokerages, as an intermediary, you come to me because you need something on the market, I come find it and place it to you. meaning I sell a carrier product, and then I move on down the road and I sell to somebody else. I see that more as a transactional nature, almost like what Dennis described as an agent. Consultant is very in line with what what Dennis described, and perhaps a consultant advisor is very similar. I view maybe advisor just from a kind of a higher view of what the business is doing more than just insurance, and perhaps we're defining it the same way. When I first got into the business, the very first client that I won the business was a commission-based payment based on the premium, and that client got a 15% increase in their cost, and I got a 15% raise. And immediately once I understood that transaction, I stopped. And literally the very first client that I ever did business with in this industry, I removed the commission.
Okay. Really?
And I went to a fee-based service.
Why? Because I guess I can glean why, but why don't you explain why that was important to you?
I felt like it was a conflict of interest because I was rewarded if they had an adverse outcome, which was higher costs. And I wanted to completely remove that incentive for me to allow a higher cost. And I wanted to be able to work. It's a very fine line in how we get paid. But if I take money from a carrier, I technically work for the carrier.
Right.
And I tell my team all the time, don't forget, I have to be very careful to say this clearly, don't forget who signs our paychecks. I had somebody say, they told me, they said I told them, don't forget who signs your paycheck. Like it was a threat.
Hey, you're like, Chris Hamilton.
Don't forget who signs our paycheck. It's important to understand that because they're the reason that we have a career.
Yeah.
And if I take money from my client, I represent my client. If I take money from a carrier, I represent the carrier. And for us, with the misaligned incentives that are in health insurance and just the brokerage industry at large, we want to make sure that we're representing our clients.
I love that.
I think spot on. And when I left the firm that I was at to start what was GDP or JDS Benefits, it became GDP Advisors, now part of Acrisure. We set out, John Powder and my longtime business partner and I, that we would be a fee-based organization. That put us on the right side of the table with our clients. I think, though, even at the fee base, what we need to realize, and again, my personal belief on this, the things that we do now that we get paid for, we will do for free in the future, or we won't be necessary to do them. The things that we do now for free, we will be able to charge for if we do them well.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, again, and I don't want to over chat GPT this, but I think what technology is doing, along with what I think is inherently at the carrier level, and sorry, Bukas, if you're listening, I will tell you this to your face, I have, they want us gone. The quicker they can get us out of the picture, the better. They won't tell you that, but I think that they would, in large part because I would if I were them, right? Because I'm in conflict to their market share and their ability to approach it. So what clients will need from us, what technology will do is allow the carriers to place business. It'll allow them to underwrite without human interaction. It will allow them to identify the right carrier, the right place, the right network, the right doctor. All of that can be done. What ChatGPT is taking all of the intelligence that we're spewing out right now and putting it together for consumption. And so what we have to constantly be thinking about is what can ChatGPT not do? What can technology not do that allows me to still be relevant? And I think it's very simple. It goes back to the basis of that human component of our job is really simple. We need to ask the right question to ascertain what is the problem. From there, we have to quantify what that problem is, meaning we have to put a value to that problem, and then simply identify and reveal the solutions to it. It's that simple. That is what we should do. So whatever you want to call that, a consultant, an advisor, a glorified janitor, I don't care. But that is effectively what we need to do, and that's what we have to convey. And what I would tell to the soon-to-be janitors, is, advisors, consultants, is be careful not to be all things to all people. That you have to still be able to recognize that this is what I know to do, and this is what I'm an expert at, and this is what I can go execute on. But have the ability to source the things you're not. And have the ability to go to those and say, well, you know what, based on what you're telling me, this is what you need. Our job, if we want to be successful at this for 5, 10, 20 years, is to be able to navigate the on and off ramps of the superhighway that the clients will need to ride down. And to your point, and Dennis, you even alluded this to, everything centers around the client. The client is the most important thing. And if you're not solving for that, you're not going to be around.
Well, how do you speak to those consultants that feel like, oh, if I'm not spearheading everything. If I'm not in control of everything, then I feel like I'm diluting my own value to my employer, right? Because there's certain consultants that would be fearful of bringing a vendor to the table because they're worried about, well, once they see that vendor articulate their solution and it's amazing, what role do I play anymore as the advisor? So how do you speak to them to provide that reassurance that that's not actually reducing the value they have to the employer, but that's actually increasing that value? Anybody?
I think you said it well, which is figure out what you're really good at and that you can't be replaced to do. And then I don't think our clients, and I tell this to every single one of my clients, you're not hiring me to be the best at everything. What you're hiring me is for this specific thing that I feel that I am an expert at. And then you're looking to me to bring the industry experts in to solve these issues. And anybody that sits in front of a client and says, look how big I am, look how big my organization is, we're the best at everything, I think is not being truthful. And it made me think of Jack Welch when Seth was talking about this. He
Stop.
had
End of sentence.
he actually
That was a soundbite?
Yeah.
Just be done with it.
Seth made me think of Jack Welch. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was famous for saying we wanted to be. His strategy at GE was, when thinking about the business units as they ran, was he wanted to be number one or number two, or he wanted to get out of it.
Okay.
And so it's figuring out what do you excel in and what's your value proposition there, and then bring a partner in that is one or two in what the one particular client needs or the clients need at that point.
Yeah.
I think, go ahead.
Yeah.
If we're always doing our job well, then we're always evaluating what's there, right? So something we're going to get to here in a little bit, right? So you've made a move, right? So
Yeah.
right, looking at captive, okay? So you talk about being replaced. You bring in a captive, it has its own data analytics database, it has its own wellness program put in place, it has its own direct primary care put in place, or it has all these different things bundled into it typically, right? So what value do I now have? Well, if I'm not continually evaluating that captive to the other 9 captives available, to the marketplace, to new contract types, if I'm not doing that to let my client know what's best in business, then I'm failing. So the idea that I would let a producer know, or a broker, or a buyer, or whatever you want to be called, right? To what you said, the name doesn't matter, right? Just do your job well. Don't let your ego be the problem. Generally, like, it's not about you. Because if you're doing your job, then this is the solution, like you said earlier, it's in pencil, right? Long term, right? This looks like it's going to be the answer, but things will change. So if I'm doing my job, then I'm going to know when things change what the next solution looks like.
Absolutely.
So you don't have to worry about being replaced if you're continuing to stay in it. It's the individual, the broker that I would say is golfing 5 days a week, that has built that block of business, that thinks I've put in the solution and I'm just going to sit back and relax and collect a check for 15 more years. That's the person that's going to get replaced.
Okay. Yeah.
You just hit the nail on the head right there, because we have seen carriers that have tried to go direct, or independent TPAs that want to manage the stop loss and the pharmacy, and the client looks up and thinks, why do I have a broker anymore? Why don't I just go direct? And you clearly articulated it's independence, it's advice, and it's change management, because the market is constantly evolving, and what was good today may not be good 2 years from now, or that particular vendor may be taking advantage of you at that particular point. So who is going to be the arbiter of independence at that point? And that was a very nice point.
Well
that you
said.
made.
Well said.
Well, let's talk kind of macro a little bit real quick. And as we're towing this line, Seth, your other job is a business analyst on the news, and you have to constantly be in front of what's going on in the market in general. Do you view the role of a consultant continuing to morph, where you're actually going to be required to be able to have conversations around that don't have anything to do with benefits? I mean, or is there a line where your role stops and they seek somebody else's guidance for something like that?
ClaimDoc is a medical claim auditing and member advocacy company. We provide fiduciary services to employer-sponsored benefit plans, and allowing them to create an environment where we ensure that the benefit plans are being charged in a fair and reasonable basis.
My business is basically people, and it become a real simple transition. We thought it was going to be far more complex. I've saved, we'll say, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I could not say enough about ClaimDoc.
I think it really goes back to what you want your role to be. I think that there will be a couple of different lanes, and maybe even more than a couple, to go down. If you want to be niche focused in something and you say, hey, I want to be the absolute best at this and only this, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a fantastic place to be. Then you will be the person that broader consultant advisor is going to bring to the table and say, this is this is what you need to do, and this is the expert that I'm bringing to the table to help guide you through that process. I think that it is naive for any one of us, all of us on this table, or anybody that's listening, to say, I'm going to be all things to all people.
Yeah.
You won't be very good at it. You've got to have those people that are in their lane as their expert to bring to the table. Your job is to be able to go back to what I said a minute ago, and I think Dennis articulated it fantastically, which is you have to be able to identify what the problem is, articulate it, quantify it, and solve for it. And sometimes that solution means you're bringing other experts to the table to do that. But that problem today will likely not be the problem tomorrow. And you're going to have to continuously be able to do that. And I think as we look at the broader business cycle, and I say this to the people on my team all the time, is that preparation leads to knowledge. Knowledge leads to confidence. Confidence leads to enthusiasm. Enthusiasm sells, right? So the more that you can prepare, and that means on a daily basis, the business acumen, what you're doing, to understand the things that Chris was talking about, Dennis was talking about. I mean, people are hearing this going, oh, if I could be there. You can.
Yeah.
You can. You've just got to prepare. You got to be willing to do. If you want to have what others don't, you have to be willing to do what others won't. And that means you've got to prepare, right? And then if you do that, you can gain that knowledge base, and that's going to lead to confidence. There's a fine line between confidence and arrogance, and it goes back to that very first thing, knowledge.
Yeah.
The people that are arrogant typically don't have the knowledge.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that ego component. Those that are knowledgeable and confident, they don't have to have egos. They because they're confident in what they know. And if a client doesn't adopt it, that's okay. There's other clients, go find them.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that from a broader sense of what's going on from a business perspective is be well-rounded and recognize that what you knew today is great for today. It may not be great for tomorrow, and you better be ready to go back and prepare and do it all over again tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And it's okay to not know.
No, it's not.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I know.
know.
That's what is it? Why is it that there's this notion that people have to be prepared to answer literally anything at that point, or they've somehow failed? Like, that's a weird position that I've seen your roles to play. And I'm sorry to stop you, but there's this perception that our consultant is obligated to know everything. And if I am a consultant and I don't have the answer to everything, I've somehow let my client down. And so I'm sorry, because I agree with you, but I'll let you finish your thought
FOMO,
there. Yeah.
Fear of missing out,
Yeah.
right? Missing out on my client. My client will leave me because I don't have the answer. So everybody wants to have every answer to everything. I just stop. There's too much. It's okay to not know.
Yeah.
Say I do not know, and I will go find out, and then do it.
Actually do it, yeah.
Yeah, actually do it.
Yeah.
Right, do it well. Report back your findings. You're fine, right? But you want to be the person who's trying to be, like you said earlier, you're going to be the jack of all trades. You're going to be the master of none. So you're not going to get it done well. So just be honest with it.
Well, I want to ask you guys, as we look at one of the things you were bringing in, Seth, and I've always thought about is this generational shift. I'm 40 now, so I feel like I'm in the middle of this generational shift. But all the stuff we're talking about is from you guys have got 10, 15, 20 years of experience in the industry. So you've earned the right to understand what you understand, and it took you a long time to get here as businessmen, as consultants. So what would you say to the 20-year-old or the 22-year-old that just came out of college, is now in a producer training program, or is learning to go out and sell? What would you say to them to really help them have the level of comfort and build the confidence that this is something they're going to do over the course of their career, where they don't get dejected, or they don't get burned out too quick, or they don't give up because they're not Chris Hamilton or Seth Denson or Dennis Fowler right away? So Chris, why don't I pose that to you, since Dennis finished the last one?
That's a great question. I think you need to figure out where you want to be and find somebody that's already there.
Okay.
And find a mentor. The quickest path to success is to find a mentor to teach you the things that you don't know, how to handle a business meeting, how to look at the economy, what are the things that are driving the market. I remember when I was in my early 20s, I didn't really know anything. I thought I did. I had a college degree, and I became an analyst, and I really didn't understand how the academic knowledge that I learned applied in the real world. And it was through certain experiences through work, but also having mentors that helped me apply that knowledge and learn what really is important and what's noise.
What about you, Seth?
Time is a great equalizer. It can be your best friend and your worst enemy. Avoid the distractions. The people, myself, Dennis, Chris, we have the exact same number of hours in a day as that young producer does. And what we choose to do with it is what's going to change the variable. And I think Chris hit the nail on the head. And I don't know Dennis's past. I know Chris's. I didn't go to college. I didn't. And I like to think I'm pretty good at this. But what I did was exactly what you did. I looked at the market at where I was. I looked at the fact that I didn't want to go play baseball anymore, and And then I went, oh my gosh, if I don't play baseball, I can't afford college. And so what I said was, I'm going to put in the sweat equity. I'm going to go find the smartest advisors that I can find to go to work for practically nothing, to learn as much as I possibly can, and then apply that. Still to this day, I mean, we've talked about this, I still get up religiously, 4:30 every morning.
Yeah.
I read as much as I possibly can. I'm constantly a sponge for knowledge. And, you know, college isn't for everybody. I certainly hope my kids go, but it's not for everybody. But education is. And education doesn't just happen in a classroom. So I think for those young producers, it's recognizing that if you did come out, you have that great degree, or you're at that great firm, at that great shop, recognize that's fine. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to spend that 24 hours that you get, that I get, that everybody else gets? And what are you going to do with that time to make yourself continue to learn, to gain that knowledge, that confidence, and be able to be a more effective?
Well, then I should toot everybody's horn here, but I'll toot yours, Seth, specifically. And it's no surprise that you're in the position that you're in. We all work hard at this table. There's no doubt. And I think nowadays, other people talk about this. I would agree. Working hard is the baseline, but you cannot achieve what Seth Denson has achieved without that work ethic. And so the example you set physically to watch and to see somebody wake up at 4:30 and end their day at sometimes at 8:30 at night, and the bookends in between is, oh yeah, I'm running the benefits practice for one of the biggest firms in the country. It's no surprise and no doubt in my mind why you're there. But the work ethic is something that absolutely has to be involved with that.
Going back to Chris's point,
Yeah.
I surround myself with people like
Of course, yeah.
people like Chris,
Yeah.
people like Spencer,
Yeah.
to know that, hey, these guys know things that I don't. And I've been taking mental notes this whole time.
Well, you're a very
and
good
going,
listener.
all
I've
right,
watched you
yep,
listen,
I'll
and you're very good at taking it all in and then commenting on it, man. That's definitely a skill. But Dennis, why don't I ask you that same question first, going back to this idea of not necessarily a piece of advice, but what would you say to that 20-year-old version of you that's looking to accomplish what the guys at this table have accomplished, or gals, right? It's not obviously not just a male-driven industry. What would you say to them?
So I think it's already been said, and I'll kind of summarize two things that Seth and Chris already both said, right? So find a mentor, find somebody that's already there that has that success. And you mentioned time. It's not going to be overnight. It's an entire benefit period for an organization is 1 year. And until you go through that experience with them, that life cycle, you don't have an experience. So if you want 3 experiences, you need 3 years. You can't replace that. There's nothing you can do to do that. So something my dad told me, and actually we had a conversation about this yesterday, something my dad told me when I was growing up was, you're going to be young and you're going to think you know it all. And then you're going to get to a point in life where you realize you know nothing. And that is when you're going to be at your most wise. And then you're going to be at a point in life where you say, get off my lawn. and that's when you need to retire.
Yeah.
Right? And I think it's really, find those people who are wise, who don't have the ego, who realize they know nothing, right? That are always a sponge, always learning, and successful. Go to those people, learn from them, and understand that it takes time.
I agree. Well, so why don't we do this, fellas? Let's move into the phase 2 of the podcast. We want to celebrate this a little bit as the 100th episode, and want to do a couple different things that we don't typically do on an episode. So let's move on to audience questions. I posed this question on Friday to the folks that followed the show. What would you have asked if you had 3 great advisors in a room? What one question would you ask? And so I got some really good commentary on the LinkedIn post. Picked out some of the ones that were my favorite. There were a bunch of great questions, some not so great that I didn't pick. But I want to let's just go around the horn. There's no particular order of the best question to the worst question, but this one comes in from Christy Gupton. She says, what is the most successful case study of an employer you work with, and what did they accomplish in terms of savings, plan improvement, measurable outcomes? So I always love employer case studies. So if we could go around the horn, give you a second to maybe think about who you're going to bring up. But why did it stand out as a favorite, and what did we accomplish? Chris, I feel like you may be ready.
Yeah, actually, I posted about this most recently on LinkedIn, maybe last week or week before last. I shared a client not testimonial, but a case study. This is a group that had just went through their 5th renewal with me, and they historically were fully insured with Blue Cross. And I use this specific case because it's not a large client. It's when you think about the universe of clients that get meaningful savings achievements, this is a 100-employee company.
Okay.
Where they were fully insured with a traditional Blue Cross Blue Shield plan. They were getting a 30% increase from Blue Cross Blue Shield. I came in with a self-insured proposal with cost management features to it. So
It's
Things
like
were controlled through
it's
your
a dirty
management
phrase,
style.
yeah.
I think
That's brilliant.
I didn't say cost containment. But here's the thing: is that they have a traditional style plan that has PPO benefits, but all of these added features to it that give employees access to free healthcare that's lower cost. And we just went through the 5th renewal, and their costs today are 30% less than they were with the fully insured current rates at that time.
Okay. Oh, so 5 years backwards. They're
5
still
years
30%
backwards, they're
below that.
30% below.
Yeah.
And I did the math, and I posted on LinkedIn that over that time period, they had saved $1.7 million. But when I shared the Excel sheet with my calculations with the CFO, who is a CPA, he said he thinks the number's closer to $2 million. So a 100-employee company over 5 years has saved $2 million.
That's incredible.
And they provide free healthcare to their employees in the process.
I'm glad you said. I want to make sure we stress that point. And also, they provide free healthcare to their employees. I want to dispel the notion that to save money, you have to dilute the benefits. You can absolutely accomplish.
People
both
think they're
simultaneously.
mutually exclusive, and I actually believe it's the opposite. They go hand in hand. If you do it right, you can provide more for less.
Seth, what about you?
I mean, yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I may take a little bit of a different angle at this, if that's okay.
And it always it doesn't have to just be about cost savings as well, right? Obviously, that's one component of.
Well, I think I'd like to take the opposite end
Yeah.
of the ones that do it the worst.
Okay,
And
yeah.
the ones that you go back and they're still clients and you kind of pound your head against the wall because they just don't get it.
Yeah.
We have one particular client, and obviously I won't say their name, but they may be up for grabs.
We'll talk about it afterwards. Yeah, who wants it?
Horse trading. No. They're great people, but they listen to anything and everything they hear.
Okay.
And they think, oh, well, it worked for Johnny, it must work for me. And they're part of all these, these groups, these collaborative groups that come together and they share war stories and this works. And they're one of those that constantly you're having to say, yeah, I get that worked for Johnny, but here's why it won't work for you. But they're just so hell bent on doing it because it sounded so good and the dollars were so great. So I think through, and it's really frustrating because then you get a call a year later when you're finally relent and you say, fine, we'll do that. Right? We'll go reference-based pricing. You heard it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then they call you, why did you ever let me do that? So it goes back to the moral of the story, which is documentation is key. Everything you say, you want to document because, documentation is something you can show back. But I think that those clients that are really invested in what advice they recognize that you can give them and want to learn from it, I think are the best success stories to the success. And those that are not are those that say, yeah, I don't care. I heard this great thing and it must be great because I heard it. When in reality, every client is like a snowflake. They're all different and they all are going to need something different at some different time. Some of those pieces might work together and some of those things might be similar, but every one of them is different. And those that don't feel that they are and they don't grasp that, those are the ones you're going to have challenges with.
What about you, Dennis?
So
And it could be also, Shannon McElnally asked a similar question. Yes, she's a colleague of mine now. No homerism here, but I want to make sure she has a slightly different spin. So whether or not you want to go case study, client success story, or maybe more just the most rewarding client experience, feel free to answer either one of those questions.
So I'll give you the rewarding side.
Okay.
Because this is a fully insured group, right? So different state, not Texas. Due to the parameters in place, just not to go down, it had to be fully insured. We didn't have another option. But what Chris said earlier about being proactive, right? So there was an individual who was a dependent, and I'm going to not cry here on your podcast.
You can do it. That's
Right.
okay.
So this person needed a life-saving treatment, but it was being denied over and over again. And I remember I got a call from the CFO. I was sitting in the Bass Pro Shop parking lot right outside in Garland, right, with my son with me on a Saturday. And there was tears, and it was like, we didn't know that, we thought it got approved. And they're at the hospital, and it was once again denied. And it was like, you've got to be kidding me, right? So we started making all the phone calls, right? Because we were proactive originally, but sometimes stuff just, you show up and it's being denied again. And through a number of phone calls over a 2-hour period, this person got this treatment, had their surgery, and they're still alive and doing well today.
That's amazing.
And it was knowing that, when you give a client like, hey, here's my cell phone, use it if you need it. And then following through and doing that for somebody, like making that difference.
Yeah.
So that's also what I tell young advisors. Like, you have to care. If you're just doing this because you think you can play golf and make good money, you're in the wrong job.
Absolutely. Well, I can tell you though, man, I'm glad you stressed that because it's, sometimes we feel, and I'm even removed a layer from you guys, but like you're a couple layers removed from the employee experience itself. And so to hear a story like that, to know, hey, I'm not just a consultant doing this as a job. Could actually have life and death potential impact in what I do. A human being's life. I mean, that reinforces, I think, the role that you guys play. And so it is an important role. Why don't I ask you, we'll ask kind of a simple one. This is from Nancy Giacalone. She's up in Seattle. I love Nancy. How do you effectively address change in the small group market? It's a little bit of, I don't say it's a broad question, but let me layer on my opinion of why I picked this one. The small to mid-sized employer. I feel like that, if you ever looked at those Kaiser studies where 15, 16, 17% of that market is technically self-funded, and it's really stayed flat over the course of the last 15 years. I look at that a huge area of opportunity for guys and gals like you that are working in the small to mid-market space a lot. There's opportunity to do radical things with them now that didn't used to exist 10 years ago. And so how are you seeing that space change in the last couple of years and some of these new solutions that are out there?
I'll say from this perspective, I want to pick up actually on what Dennis just said. And thank you for sharing that, man. Like I tell people on my staff all the time that this is an extension of who I want to be in the mark that I want to leave in the world. I grew up, my father was a minister. I went to seminary. I mean, it was one of those things that this is part of the calling that some of us feel like we have in our lives, is to try to improve the lives of others. And it's great that we get paid to do that. I think that here's what you have to start with, right? Cancer doesn't care if you're in a large group or small group. Those things, pediatric diabetes, those types of things don't care. And so if you can start with the foundational of what can be done for these smaller groups and start to think outside of the box of how do we put programs together and where do they fit and how can we go pull them off the shelf when necessary and do that. And then recognize that if you don't chase, a lot of people don't do the small group because they say, well, there's just no money in it. And there's some truth to that. But I am a firm believer that if you do the right thing, the money will chase you. And so if you can think of what that market can do. And I think that there's a mass opportunity in that small market, even in that market that's trying to combat the ACA, whether it's what's going on in the self-funded market or even through direct contracting capabilities. I think there's a massive opportunity. Captives. I think captives provide this new avenue for smaller employers to access the market in a way that they couldn't do in the past without getting their teeth kicked in when that bad claim comes. So I think that there's going to be more of that. And if you are open to broadening your horizon and perspective, and constantly learning and thinking about what message you can deliver in that space, I think that the small market is actually not a bad place to be.
I would agree. Either one of you guys want to weigh in on that? You don't all have to answer the questions if you don't have anything to add.
I think it's an underserved market today. You've seen a number of entrants that have come in, particularly, we've got a group down in a carrier in Austin that's tried to approach that market. People know it as Sana. There's a couple other players that are using level funded TBA plans. I'm particularly excited about a plan that's coming to market next year from Texas Mutual.
Okay.
And they wouldn't mind me just kind of free advertising for them, but they're actually a client of mine, and I've done quite a bit of consulting with them. And they actually it started off as a kind of a slip into a bill from a state legislator up in Wichita Falls for Texas Mutual to do a feasibility study on the ability to offer a health plan to the small group market, particularly in Texas, especially only in Texas. And for those that aren't familiar with the Texas Mutual history, the workers' compensation market back in the 70s and 80s was very much like what we experienced with the healthcare market today, hyperinflationary, no cost controls. And they were established by the state legislature to rein that market in and fix it. And now Texas Mutual is probably one of the most reputable insurance carriers in the state of Texas. And they're now taking that same approach of fixing a broken system, particularly in that small group space.
Love it.
And they're adopting a lot of the strategies and taking to market what I think is going to be revolutionary, and it's going to be the blueprint for other states to follow.
Wow. Incredible. What about you? What are your thoughts there, Dennis?
So same thing. So we kind of talked about captive, right? So even a consortium approach, right? So you have everything deconstructed and then put back together, right? So whether it's partially self-funded through a captive or just through a different type of plan where you're call it a hybrid level funded, hybrid self-funded plan, right? Where the rebates are like it's a level funded but carved out. So rebates actually go back to the employer, right? Things like that. I think doing that for the small market is what I'll say will pull the small market out of what the small market is. But Seth hit on it when talking about are brokers really going to go through that effort in that space? Because it becomes a financial decision. Right? Because if there's not as much money in a group of that size, and I'll also say what's difficult, and you don't ever want to say like, oh, my clients are difficult, right? But a lot of those really small groups, they don't have anybody in HR. So getting them to actually understand and grasp the concept and to implement it is infinitely more difficult because there's not somebody there whose role is designed to manage it.
Yeah.
So now you're asking somebody else who's done nothing but pushed an easy button, right? What's my rental? Here's my spreadsheet, and there.
Yep.
Right? Now you're managing together a plan, and you're trying to understand the nuances of how the plan works. I think getting the employer to buy in to being a part of that process is as equally as challenging as deciding, do I want to work on a group that's going to pay me a smaller amount?
Right.
I think, and I love this question from Nancy, by the way, and I love Nancy. She's amazing. And I think there's two components to that. The first is recognizing that if you want to pursue that market, you have to understand how to do it efficiently and effectively, because you do have to make money.
It has to be profitable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, you're going to want to utilize technology and capability. The other thing to be watching for, and again, I think that there is a movement legislatively to start to broaden the capability of that small market system. And I think that you will see this broader movement of individualized policies done on an employer capable chassis that will come to the market to allow those smaller employers to have portable access to develop benefits that can move from an employer to employer and get it out of the employer system and more on an individual decision. Healthcare is extremely an individual decision.
Yeah.
And I think that there is finally a recognition from a legislative perspective of that. And I think that the market will address it and be allowed to through legislation.
Yeah, and I think that solution that you're talking about, Seth, is primarily driven because nobody else has addressed the small group market. Because at the end of the day, it goes back to what do we spend for healthcare? And you mentioned it. If you have a 10-employee company and you have one case of cancer, you've completely outstripped the premium that's been taken in by the carrier. So the name of the game, to kind of combine what Seth said and Dennis said, is how do you make it efficient and create it at scale that is a prudent buyer of healthcare?
Yeah. All right, so a couple more questions left. We'll do one fun one, or we'll end with the fun one, but one more kind of consultant-driven question. I do have to apologize to Sims Tillerson because I told him I would read his question. I thought it was good, but we've covered what are the biggest trends in healthcare. So sorry, Sims, you already had your question answered, just not directly, so you have to listen to the whole thing. I will do the fun one, and then we'll come back to the technical one. This podcast is sponsored by PlanSite. PlanSite is a technology for employee benefits brokers to more efficiently manage their RFP process for any group size, all funding types, and over 20 benefit lines and point solutions. PlanSite is the only end-to-end RFP technology on the market today. Let's modernize your RFP process together. Check us out at plansite.com. First car, Chris Hamilton, what was your very first car? This is from Eric Silverman. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm the youngest of 3 boys. And I saw my oldest brother, who's 8 years older than me, get mom's car.
Okay.
Hand me down.
Yeah.
And he didn't like it. And I remember my dad saying, and this has stuck with me since, he said, if you don't like it, earn the money to go buy your own. And so at 9 years old, I started a miscellaneous handyman business. I mowed yards, I scrubbed garbage cans, I power washed sidewalks. And I saved up enough money. When I was 14 years old, I bought a 1969 Chevy pickup at 14. And driving it home, it broke down, and it turned into a project, body off restoration project with my dad and I, and it was awesome.
Yeah, but maybe that project, even though it was a little bit burdensome, right, actually ended up being a good thing because it gave you time to bond with Pops.
It
awesome.
did.
What about you, Seth? First car, man.
So
Porsche,
somewhat
Maserati,
maybe a Hot Wheels. No, so similar. So I'm the middle son, and I remember going to my dad. I was probably 14. You're already thinking about turning 16 and getting your car. And I said, Dad, when I turn 16, am I going to get a car? And he's like, well, son, your mom and I, we don't have the money to go buy a new car, and you need to start praying. And what was great was, and this is a longer story for another day, but how there was orchestration of my mom ended up getting a car provided to her, or actually my dad did really, that allowed me to get the truck that my dad and I, when I was 14, started building together. So we built an F-150. We went out and we bought the we bought the chassis. It was a Ford 85 Bronco. We bought the body, and we hired a machinist, and we did some of it ourselves. And this truck had a Chevy fuel injection system, a Ford 351. It had a Bronco chassis and a Ford F-150, but it had a Blaupunk stereo and a kicker box.
Sounds like a health
kicker.
plan.
But you know what was great? And to that point, I think it kind of brings those together. while some people that I knew growing up, like they got all these brand new trucks, mine was the one that would pull everybody out of the mud. It was built the best, it was the most efficient, and today I'm sure that truck is still putzing around Midland, Texas. And if it's there and I found it, I would
You
take
buy it
out
again.
loan, I would
Yeah.
mortgage the house to get it. But yeah, 85 F-150 that my dad and I built, and the memories with that,
I love it.
really cool.
What about you, Dennis?
So you would think, as the only child, I was the one that was gifted some sort of really super nice vehicle. Not to insult the vehicle I had. So my dad gave me this, you're going to wreck your first car, so no matter what, I'm not buying you.
That's funny.
And I was like, thank you for the confidence. And I did not wreck that car. But it was so I started driving in 96. It was a 91 Plymouth Laser, which you probably don't know what that looks like. They made it for about 4 years. It's the knockoff of the Mitsubishi Eclipse hatchback.
Okay.
And it was in the aqua teal, like of the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah.
Right? So I had this aqua teal hatchback, 4-cylinder, 5-speed. Then I went and got the massive Nike swoosh to put on the back of that hatch. And I had my 2 kicker 12s
Of
and
course,
Rockford Fosgate. Yeah. I spit in and I remember I bought my Pioneer head unit stereo with the little dancing dolphins on the screen, if you remember that one from back in the 90s. Yeah, when it was like, oh, look, I have a screensaver, and you could push the button to take your cover
Oh,
off.
yeah,
yeah.
No one's stealing my radio.
right, yeah.
Might break into my $2,000 car, but I'm keeping my $2,000 radio.
Wait, where was the Nike swoosh?
It was on the hatch, the hatchback.
Oh, in the back of the
Yeah,
hatch.
and it was great because I could pull into the driveway, and I had it like so loud that like I could have the dishes in the sink rattling, and the hatch would like be doing this on the glass.
So I'm going to tell, so that's hilarious that he said that. My dad, when we were building that truck, made sure he put the loudest possible pipes he could on that thing, the glass packs.
Oh, yeah.
So that way there was no sneaking home. He knew
Genius.
a mile away when I was coming home. There was no coasting. I would try, how fast could I get this thing going on the way home
And just
and
neutral
shift
it,
it into
yeah.
neutral as quick as possible? No. Dad heard it 2 miles away.
That's hilarious. Well, being a 90s kid myself, I had a banging stereo, but my car was a 94 Ford F-150 inline 6-cylinder. The cloth bucket seat because the two-door, before the quad cabs became a thing. But I remember it was two-tone red with a gray, like under, I don't know if the undercarriage or the bottom was gray. It had chrome wheels, but back in the day, like 15s were kind of like the size. So I had these like large tires, but these like 15-inch chrome wheels that I actually forgot. I let it get so dirty one time that when I washed it, I'm like, oh yeah, those wheels are chrome because they'd just gotten so disgusting. But my favorite 2 things about that were, one, I had a Godzilla cup holder. So back in the day, I think it was like Taco Bell or somebody, when Godzilla the movie came out and it was all CGI, you got this Taco Bell cup holder where your like drink would fit into it, and it went inside the door. So it was basically a makeshift cup holder that was Godzilla. But then I had a Pantera sticker. Chris, you'll appreciate this. I had a Pantera sticker on the back, and I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. 2 8-inch subs behind it, a nice head unit, door speakers, you name it. And it was just like your kidneys would rattle, like whenever you turn the music up.
So
But I
did you
thought that
bleach
was the
your hair?
best.
Did you bleach
Oh
your
my
hair?
God! Have you probably haven't
I
seen
saw the
the
pictures
photo.
of him with the tiger.
There are
Yeah, I have
pictures.
me and a tiger, 3 earrings. There's a cartilage piercing.
Yeah.
I had braces
see
at
the
the
hole right
time.
there, yeah.
Yeah, still got the holes. Holding a baby tiger because we was the Mansfield Tigers, but absolutely like sun in and bleach blonde hair. You name it, man.
Yeah, I had the earrings and the bleached hair. Not that you can tell I had hair, but yeah, that was the look.
Well, so why don't we do this, fellas? Let's move into the final part of this. And as part of this, I'd like to celebrate, if you don't mind, the 100th episode. So Mike Pattingale, if you guys know who him, he was a recent guest on the episode. He's with Springbuck, the data analytics platform. Mike donated a bottle of Weller 12 to commemorate this occasion. So I will, if you don't mind, joining me in a toast, guys, and we'll just spend the next 15 minutes or so just chatting a little bit.
Absolutely.
So let me get the cups out and hand these around. There you go, sir. A little bit of dead time. But people, if you're listening at home and you want to bust out your own bottle of bourbon, I would recommend doing so right now. So, guys, I really want to just say thanks real quick because this is, I very rarely celebrate milestones. I forget to celebrate them. And as I started to realize we were approaching the 100th episode, I thought if there was any time to actually celebrate an achievement on the podcast, that was probably worth stopping and taking stock. So I just want to personally thank all 3 of you guys for joining me as guests on this. And this is something that's been, an accidental endeavor for me that turned into something that was serious and then turned it into an identity and has led to job opportunities I never would expect it. And I just want to take a second to say thank you and just enjoy the moment. Cheers, brother. Cheers.
Well, I will let me have that drink because cheers is bad if you don't.
Actually take the drink. Yeah, don't feel obligated. I know we might have things to do after this.
Well, that's really good. Well, it is 7 a.m.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, right. That's movie magic, dude.
I'm not trying to speak for these guys; they speak for themselves. But what you have brought to our business has been powerful. And I said at the very beginning, both Dennis and Chris mentioned education. Education starts with this role. Mm-hmm. It's our responsibility to educate. We are professional teachers if we're doing it right.
Yeah.
You have been the teacher to the teachers, my friend. And you have taught us. What I have learned from you has been exponential.
Thank you.
And I continue to learn from you and your guests and people like Dennis and Chris. And so this 100th milestone is sensational, and I can't wait for 200th and beyond. What you have done, what you continue to do, is invaluable to the craft that we all call home. So,
cheers,
you, my friend.
Cheers, man. Thank you for that. On the 200th episode, I feel like we might have to do a green screen or something. Like, I was joking with Nathan. Maybe we'll be in space, floating in space for the 200th episode. Sorry, Chris. Yeah, go ahead, man.
I was just going to say congratulations. 100 episodes is unbelievably amazing when you think about how many podcasts there are out there. Very few of them get beyond just a handful of episodes.
Yeah.
And the fact that you've reached this point, not only the success of the number of episodes, but the quality is amazing. And I have used your videos to help train some of my staff on the concepts of self-funding. To echo Seth's comments, I continually learn from the guests that you bring onto the show. But aside from that, just the content that you create as a fellow content creator, the things I've learned from you, seeing you go through this process, I have learned from as well. So not only the show, but just the process that you've taken us through. And it's amazing, and I'm just very grateful to be a part of it in some small way, appearing a couple times. And
you were the leading appearer on the podcast at 4. It was going to be 5, too.
We took note.
Yeah. We'll have to invite you on a couple more times, you on a couple more times. Well, you were going to actually come on a couple months ago, and we had to reschedule, but we were going to talk about just health in general, because we have aligned on health and nutrition and things like that. But I appreciate you taking the time out of your day regularly to appear.
Absolutely.
Sure,
it's an honor.
It's been fun. I mean, wanted to try to just reflect on this. Because I started this accidentally. People ask me, well, what was the story? How did this start? You referenced the stop loss videos I did before, but I don't know. Not everybody probably knows and listens to this podcast. I did stop loss videos on a whiteboard where I had no idea what I was doing. But I thought, man, it's COVID 2020.
Well, I hope you did, because we're using that to teach.
I used to say you were the Karl Rove of the health insurance. For those that follow politics, he's always got the whiteboard. I'm like, oh, Spencer, he's the Karl Rove of the health insurance.
Let me
His predictions don't matter.
That's true.
So fun, Spencer. Well, no, let me clarify. I knew what I was doing on stop loss insurance.
Okay.
I didn't know what I was doing on content creation, and so I just sort of looked at what some others have done, setting the examples, Dr. Eric Bricker being one of those. There's a couple other folks. Obviously, Seth, the stuff you've done is at a scale that I can only, one day hope to achieve. But I looked at that and go, I think there's something here, this content creation. Gary V's beating us over the head all the time. You got to make video. And I thought, well, could you do that in stop loss insurance? Could you do that in insurance in general? Could you do that in self-funding? And the answer is clearly an unequivocal yes, but I had no idea what I was doing to start. I never thought it would morph into this. And so what I would say to anybody is that you don't have to have the end in mind necessarily. And I never had a goal what was supposed to happen as an outcome, because I think if I did, I would have set myself up for failure, because I would have thought it had to happen really quickly, or it had to have this audience size, or these metrics had to come along. And if I didn't, after a certain artificial data point in the future, that didn't happen, then I might have given up. But I just embraced this broadly with no real agenda of what the outcome was supposed to look like. I figured if I could be pure about this, I could just want to educate. I could also be a student simultaneously with brilliant people like you guys, that the answer would come over time. And so if I could convey anything to anybody about making content, is just have some basic ideas of what you want to achieve, and then just simply go do it. It's the doing it that most people fail at, because they get scared or they get insecure. It's the getting there to actually just go do it, and then let sort of the marketplace and your own ideas sort of flourish from there. But you don't have to know exactly what you're doing the first time you turn on the camera.
The one thing I would say that I've noticed about you since the beginning, if you go back and watch the very first videos, you are passionate
Yeah.
about stop loss, and you've been
Weirdly, yeah.
passionate this entire way. If you just look at the type of guests that you've had on, you've had a passion for and a curiosity to learn along with the guests. And so I think it's great advice to encourage people to go create content and find something that you're passionate about.
Yeah,
Well, I
absolutely.
think what
I
that
can-
does too. Oh, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off. I think what that does, it goes back to we've been talking about knowledge, like your need to have knowledge. I've known you. I knew you long before when you were a carrier rep, and even before that. Your knowledge of this space is so broad now because you don't come build content without knowing what you need to talk about and learning while you're doing. And so I think for those advisors that are out there, young or old or in between, or maybe stuck in a rut and saying, well, I don't know, and our friend Danny Neary talks about this all the time. Go build some content. And what you will find is it will help spur your knowledge. And you said it, I say it as enthusiasm, passion. It's kind of the same thing. That knowledge just exudes that. And by the way, my kids say this. I talk to my kids, and we had career day with the kids the other day.
Oh yeah, that's right.
It was what does your daddy do for a living? I'm like, my job. I'm a professional storyteller, and that's effectively what my job is to do. Sometimes I get to write the stories, but I have to tell them. You, my friend, are one of the greatest storytellers in this business. And part of that, though, is that your story is changing and it's growing with you. I mean, I love that, you've had fashion people on this. And I love when I hear people talk that have known nothing about something. They actually enjoy your program because of the broad aspect of it. So kudos to you.
I remember I told somebody, I was like, yeah, it's about 92 episodes up. And they were like, what? How do you talk about insurance? For now, I was like, you just have to check it out. So they went, watched, right? And they're like, it is really that good. You were right.
Thanks, man. Wow.
And those were PNC guys.
Oh, really?
I was talking to.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, that's how impactful what you're saying is. Like they don't even.
But I look at this like I get to be a student every day. Seth, you were talking about, or you just mentioned it. It's like when I have a Chris Hamilton on, or a Dennis, or a Seth, or naming the guests, right? I had a young gentleman named Caleb Williams. He's in Tennessee. He's a future episode. I saw him on Instagram, and he's making all these great videos about the infinite asset and talking about whole life and the ability to not only manage your wealth, but also have protection. And I'm like, that kid is interesting, and he's smart, and he's sharp, and he's successful. What if I could have him on? And he came down, and I had him on, and it was like I got a chance for an hour to talk to somebody and learn from somebody that was an expert in their niche. And it's like, what better way to learn than to get to have an hour with somebody where there's no distractions and nothing else going on? I'm actually getting to learn every single time I sit down with somebody. So yeah, you proffer me as potentially an educator, but I'm literally simultaneously being educated by my guests, which I think is so much fun.
That's the thing.
And
constantly learning.
Your great skill set too is listening, because to have a podcast and to be involved in this conversation, like we did a roundtable today, right? It's not, I have an agenda, you talk, I ask another question. That gets really boring and there's a disengagement.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. But every single one of your episodes, and I would say that as somebody who's been on your podcast, right, you appreciate this when the person you're talking with hears what you say, talks about that, and then has the next question.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's a level of engagement. But that goes back to you as a person.
Well,
right.
Thank you.
Even and I think we talked about it, I don't know if it was on camera or not at the beginning, your first episode, right? The first one that we shot, the camera was, or the volume, right? Microphones were not.
The microphone wasn't even plugged in.
So we had to come back. And we were like on a rush because it was already supposed to get put on in we had like 48 hours to get it done.
Yeah.
And you were upset, like, well, I can't believe I'm asking you to do this twice, right? And like the amount of passion and care that you had in that, which I was thrilled to do it twice, because I was like, man, I don't want to say that again. I need to say it that way. Don't use that word. Use that word.
Yeah, you got to do over. We both got to do over on the first one.
Yeah, but your caring, your passion. You're going to be doing this a long time.
The checks are all going to clear, fellas. I mean, God, you don't have to layer it on that thick.
I was going to ask you what was the biggest lesson that you learned doing this, but obviously, as Dennis just pointed out, make sure the microphone.
Make sure well, that's so Nathaniel, who doesn't ever really appear on the other side, but he's like my Jamie if I was Joe Rogan. Nathaniel makes this whole thing happen, and I'll probably take a picture here in a second so people can see what it looks like on the other end, because this is crazy what Nathaniel set up. But Nathaniel got a lesson as well, because he was early on running the soundboard at that location. location, the old location. And so we both got a like aha moment for both of us. And Nathan has never once made that mistake again. But like these are the things that you don't know going in. You could do literally everything right, you think, and then one little thing goes wrong, and you have to figure out, well, okay, what do I do next time, or how do I fix that, or how do I solve for that? And I think that's part of the fun, because we are capturing, even though this is not live, I don't really edit anything. So other than if something was like a regulatory problem where you misspoke that's going to get you in legal trouble, I'm not pulling anything off this podcast. So there's an element of, as soon as those cameras go on, I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen, but that's fun to me. I enjoy that.
Well, so let's turn the tables on you and ask you a question. I'm really curious, genuinely, what have been some of the biggest surprises or unexpecteds that have come from this podcast?
I would say the single biggest surprise, and I may have mentioned this before, is the willingness for people to not only say yes, that I was really surprised I got them, but they're the willingness to travel without there's no fight. Now, some people may not know this. I don't pay guests to be on the show. So the willingness for somebody to hop on a plane, that we've had one call, they maybe have seen some podcasts in the past and they say, yep, I'll be there. Tell me when I got to be there and let's do it. I've been so grateful that I was very surprised. Some of the folks I've had travel across the country literally to appear. And so that was very surprising, because I had no idea that was going to be the case. Some of the other surprises just are really around the level of effort it takes to do this and the level of time. I mean, I'm starting to try to buy back my time. There's a guy named Dan Martell that wrote a book called Buy Back Your Time. I'm starting to think about, like, as I want to continue to stay passionate about this and stay in my zone of genius, as Andy told me the other day. I've got to start buying back my time to take away some of the things that I don't love to do. I find time over lunch or at night when the kids are in bed to edit a podcast or get it ready for posting. But I think the next phase of this that I was very surprised about is how much effort this takes to do. And I obviously have my obligations with my new employer, ParetoHealth, that I want to make sure I fulfill and exceed the expectations there. And so the buying back of the time as much as I can is something that I'm really focused on for 2023.
So if we're going to get to turn the tables, and if you don't like this question, you can edit it out.
Okay,
right?
yeah. Nathan, be prepared. Timestamp.
Outside of Dennis, Chris, and myself, the most memorable episode in life.
Ooh, that's a very good question.
He phrased it with episode though, not person, so you have a little bit.
That's right.
Okay.
You've got maybe it was the microphone fell or a
light that's
shattered.
Great. Well, we haven't really had, knock on this plastic table, we haven't really had any so far snafus outside of that first one. The most memorable recently is one that still hasn't come out yet, but I'm very, very confident it's going to be well received. As I sat down with Scott Smith of True Network Advisors. For the second time, I went to Guntersville the first time, he came here the second time. We had a conversation about life and legacy and leadership and running an organization, like nothing to do with insurance. I literally got a master class in how to lead an organization. I can't wait for that to come out. I think maybe almost cried on that I think that was podcast I was telling you, maybe almost cried when I started talking about why I wanted to do this stuff in the first place and my children. Man, such a great conversation. Like I wish I could bottle that up every single week. That was definitely a standout for me. There's some other great ones from a technical aspect, but that was one in recent memory that absolutely I think is a standout for sure. Good question.
By doing this, you've always given all of us in our own way, whether we talk about our firms or our successes or what we've seen in the marketplace, right? It's an opportunity still that we've all in a way have sold ourselves, right? So to give that back to you now, right? You've recently made a move, as you just said. And I think it's only fair that you get your opportunity to kind of say, here's where I'm at, here's why I'm doing it, and let us know what that is.
So maybe you've alluded to this prior, but this is probably the first time I've talked about it publicly. I joined ParetoHealth. So we're shooting on May 1st. I joined on April 24th, so literally a week ago. But was very fortunate to get on the radar of the genius, as you described him, Andrew Cavanaugh, and Kate Thurston, who works with him as well. And just they approached me casually about 6 weeks ago and said, hey, we like what you're doing with the podcast. Would you be interested in perhaps doing that with and for us? And so we started going through conversations, started sort of formulating what the role would be. And I still think it's even yet to be fully defined, which is kind of fun and interesting and exciting. But they approached me and said, hey, we want you to be with us and we think it fits. And then I looked at their brand, because it's not just about me. I looked at the brand that they've created. And I don't want this to be a commercial, but the brand they've created in the captive space is second to none, and by a huge margin as well. So when I thought about maybe altering my career and changing paths and leaving PlanSight and how difficult that was for me personally, especially with the co-founders, it just started to make sense. And I think I confided in all three of you, if I'm not mistaken, prior to going. And it just started to really go, all right, I can see a future here. I can see how I fit in this organization. I might actually see how I would help them grow. And it just started to naturally feel like this is going to be home. So my role, just so, to be specific, is SVP of Consultant Development, which is can combine training, sales, internal and external messaging, some marketing, some podcasting, a lot of things that I love to do. But this first time in my life, I'm going to be in the position of more of a coach and a teacher than anything else. And so as I came to terms with that, I realized how actually happy that was going to make me as well.
Will suit you well.
Yeah, buddy, I will tell you, as a longtime friend, I consider Andrew Clayton and Andrew Kavanaugh at Pareto brothers. Mm-hmm. I'm part of their family. They're part of mine. I wouldn't be here today without them. They are arguably, if not the best, some of the best in the business, and they just got better with you, buddy.
Well, thanks.
So
I
congratulations.
appreciate that, yeah. Well, guys, we'll wrap it up. I mean, I want to leave the table for you all, if you don't mind, real quick, just closing thoughts. I mean, literally anything you want to say as we wrap up the podcast. I'll do the same. But eeny, meeny, miny, mo. We'll make Dennis go first. But just,
He was the first guest.
You were the first guest. You were the first one to come back for the 100th episode. So we had 99 episodes in between. But as you've sort of grown over the last couple of years, obviously you got a new role. We just had a 90-minute conversation, probably, give or take. What is the one thing that you want to leave folks with?
Wow. Okay, so we've talked about different market segments and different ways of getting it done. Mm-hmm. I would say, for whether it's a producer or an employer, be open to the idea of education, because there is so much changing, whether it's in the economy or within insurance or within technology, and it's all at this point of converging together. Mm. So be willing and open to new conversations and new ideas, no matter who you are in this ecosystem, because there is about to be a lot of change.
Yeah, well said. What you, Chris?
Challenge assumptions, be a student, be a servant.
Enough said. I love it. What you said.
I say it to my team all the time, and to compete, you have to be willing to do what the competitors do, but to win, you have to be willing to do what they don't. Figure out what that is. And I'm going to leave it on a really cheesy rom-com line from
do
Matthew
it, please.
McConaughey.
Yeah.
In that what you think is great really may be great, but it may not be as great as something greater. Go figure out what greater is.
Awesome. Love it. Well, I'm going to end on something that nothing profound, nothing necessarily benefits related, but I actually want to say thank you to Nathaniel because this guy has been here for nearly 100 episodes with me, and I've seen him grow as a business owner and entrepreneur, seen his skill set grow as well. And what you see on the other side of this camera would absolutely not be possible without him, and so I want to make sure he gets the recognition that he deserves. So here's you, Nathaniel.
Cheers, buddy.
Here's to 100 episodes, too.
100 episodes.
Thanks, fellas.
Thank you.